of years ago, I was in a restaurant, and I ordered a sausage. The plate resulted in nothing special, not a great taste. So I called the waiter and asked him, "Where does this meat come from?" He answered with a shrug, "I don't know. We buy our meat from a company." I did not indulge in my quest for information. I left part of this poor taste sausage. I paid the bill and walked out. Then I started to dig deeper into the issue. I went to the supermarket near my house and looked into the products that were sold. Meat, but also fruits, vegetables, milk, all kinds of processed food. And I figured out that what I was getting was not a great deal of information. Almost nothing on the origin of raw materials. No information whatsoever on the industrial process they had undergone. I felt shocked. This is the food I used to put into my body, and I don't know anything about it? So, giving an answer to the question I had put the reluctant restaurant's waiter became sort of a mission that could be summarized with two simple questions. Where does our food come from, and how is it produced? Let me go back to my sausage. Since I was denied any real answer, I could not retrace its origin. So I decided to go for a wider picture. I chose to investigate the whole system in order to know not only about that very sausage, but every sausage I could ever happen to eat. Of course, any of us knows it. 70% of the meat consumed across the planet comes from industrial livestock operations. Pigs, but also chickens, cows, rabbits are raised in barns. They are packed together, and they often spend their entire life without ever seeing the sunlight. Any of us knows it, but not many of us are eager to talk about it. It is weird, isn't it? We eat more and more meat, but in the last 3 to 4 decades, we have established a sort of distance from the animals this meat comes from. It is what psychologists call suppression. You push away a thought you don't really bear. We all know farm animals live in horrible conditions, but we prefer to pretend not to know. Out of sight, out of mind. In the last few years, the public debate has been dominated by the so-called overpopulation question. The FAO estimates humanity will reach 9 billion people by 2050 and urge to produce more food to feed this growing population. But does anybody of you know how many farm animals are raised on Earth? The figure is impressive. Every year on the planet, 70 billion farm animals are killed. This number in 1960 was 9 times lower. And if meat consumption follows the current trend, in 2050, we will raise and kill 120 billion animals yearly on the planet. 120 billions. This is a 15-fold growth compared to 1960. So, how could we reach such a level in a relatively short period of time? How is that possible that the sausage my father ate in 1960 has multiplied into 15 sausages my son, or maybe myself, who knows, will eat in 2050? You know, we are all convinced industrial livestock operations have a long history behind them, but it is not really the case. The system as it is known today has existed for less than a century. And you know what? It was created by accident. It is the result of a delivery mistake. In 1923, Cecil Steele, a farm wife from Delaware, ordered 50 chicks for egg production. The line was probably disturbed, so the supplier misunderstood the order and sent her 500 chicks instead of 50. At first, she didn't know what to do, but finally, Mrs. Steele decided not to return the animals, to raise them indoor and feed them with corn and food supplements. The animals survived the winter and were right after sold to enthusiastic buyers. Mrs. Steele made a pile of money and immediately ordered 1,000 more heads. A new business was created, the industry of poultry. Yet, we had to wait 50 more years to see the system be implemented to a larger extent. In the 70s, a man called Wendell Murphy, a farmer from North Carolina, had an idea. Why don't we apply Mrs. Steele's method to pigs? It was a bit of a challenge. Pigs are bigger and thus more difficult to pack in such small facilities. But Wendell Murphy was a visionary. So he gave farmers in North Carolina money in advance and convinced them to concentrate hogs in barns. The idea proved successful. Closing those warehouses, the animals grew faster and fatter. Since then, the system has been named CAFO, Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations. And the name is quite appropriate. Animals are there just to be fed, grow fast, and be killed. Out of sight, out of mind. Wendell Murphy was a pioneer. Since then, North Carolina has become one of the most important producing states in the US. So in my attempt to track back the origin of my imaginary sausage, North Carolina, the place where it all started, was a must-go location. Before going, I tried to make contact with the companies producing meat in the state, but I didn't get many positive answers. You know, the meat industry is not the most open one, let alone to a journalist coming from Europe and trying to understand the history behind an anonymous sausage. So after the meat bosses stood me up, I got in touch with some activists that are challenging the CAFO system. They are called water keepers. Their boss, Rick Dove, is an outspoken Vietnam veteran in his 70s. And when I talked to him on the phone, he kept on telling me about the lagoons. At first, I did not really understand what he meant. I'm a guy born and raised in Italy, so to me, the term lagoon reminded nothing else than the outstanding Venice Laguna. But the day after I met Rick, early in the morning, he put me on a small tourist flight, a 4-seat Cessna, and told me, now you're going to see the lagoons, my friend. We took off. At the beginning, the landscape was wonderful. Beautiful lakes, green flat land, perfectly maintained, old colonial-style houses equipped with swimming pools, and occasional golf fields. But after a while, around 20 minutes, everything changed. Welcome to Swain County, told me Rick. And from the window, I could see all the CAFOs, dozens of barns, and I immediately understood what the lagoons were. Every series of barns was sided by an open-air cesspool. So what in my mind reminded a romantic landscape was the most horrible one, a man-made earthen basin full of pigs, urine, and feces. This is the system. Pigs, urine, and feces are flushed into those lagoons. And when the basin reaches its capacity, the content is sprayed over the surrounding fields. Disgusting, isn't it? Especially if you live around the area. Let me make an historical digression to understand what the CAFO implications are. From the very beginning of the livestock history in ancient Mesopotamia, animal farming and agriculture were very much intertwined. Animals used to pasture on fields, and their manure was valued as a fertilizer. It is what we would call today circular economy, a system that regenerates by itself, reducing waste at the minimal. The CAFO system relies much more to a typical industrial extractive model. Animals are like machines that have to be fueled and that produce waste. Animals in CAFO are not able to roam freely, and they have to be fed. So fodder composed by corn and soybean are delivered to those warehouses where the animals live in confinement. So it's no more animal farming. It's much more a factory. And this factory system, invented by accident by Mrs. Steele and implemented in North Carolina by Wendell Murphy, then it has been exported worldwide, first to Europe and then to other parts of the world, namely to China. China is the new CAFO frontier. In the last 10 years, the Chinese government has implemented an industrialization process, allowing some companies to control the whole supply chain, from the CAFOs to the processing facilities. This is more or less the same system you can see everywhere else in the world, but with a size difference. China accounts for half the world's pig population. In China, there are 700 million pigs, 1 for every 2 human citizens. So, in my attempt to investigate the global pork meat supply chain, I could not help but go to China. And when I went there, I was unexpectedly very well welcomed. I could visit CAFOs, slaughterhouses, packaging facilities. I could do whatever I was prevented from doing in Europe and North America. Chinese are proud of their industrial facilities and eager to show them to foreigners. And when I visited the first CAFO, what did they see? This. Does it look familiar to you? Those are exactly the same breedings as the ones you can see in the West. I was confused. I expected to see Chinese breedings, but then the owner explained me they import sows from the West because they use genetic lines that have already been adapted for confinement in CAFOs. So every year, thousands of sows are shipped by flight to China from Europe and North America to produce piglets for industrial livestock operations. What do those pigs eat? China has not as much land as the United States. It cannot produce by itself all the corn and soybean needed to feed this army of farm animals. So Chinese import soybean from South America. Only in Brazil and Argentina, 55 million hectares are dedicated to soy production for animal farming. It's an area the size of France. Large part of the Amazon rainforest have been chopped to make room for this soybean monoculture for animal feeding in China. Let me describe you the journey of soybean from South America to China. Soybean is produced in inner Brazil, then it crosses the whole country by truck. Then it is loaded onto a container ship that crosses the Atlantic Ocean, the Panama Channel, the Pacific Ocean. Then it is loaded onto a train to end up in a pig's stomach in some CAFOs in China, 20,000 kilometers away. Crazy, isn't it? Can you imagine the amount of pollution this system creates? How many CO2 emissions have been produced by this transport of animals and soybean? How much land has been used to produce crops for animal feeding instead of food for direct human consumption? Can we really afford it? I guess you are now thinking, yes, but we are in Italy, we are pretty far from this global scenario, what could we do? We have our own productions, but do you guys know how our own productions are produced? How pigs are raised in our Pianura Padana? What do they eat? How their waste is disposed of? Exactly in the same way. Of course, numbers are different. We only have 8 million pigs, but those 8 million pigs produce feces and urines that pollute the air and the waterways. Those 8 million pigs eat corn and soybean that we also import from South America, contributing to Amazon deforestation. Are we aware of this? Not really. Out of sight, out of mind. Then yes, CAFO allow economies of scale and significant cost reduction. Meat became cheap, very cheap. But is it really cheap? Does the cheap price we pay reflect the actual production cost, or should we take into account the environmental cost of polluting the air and the waterways, of the waste created by this extractive economy? This price is paid by each and every one of us, and more in general, by the planet we live in. So now I would ask you a question. What would you do if you saw in a meat packaging a label similar to the one you can now read on cigarettes? It hurts the planet, it pollutes the air and the waterways, it causes suffering to the animals. What would you do if you knew to have the responsibility of the food chain in your hand? Would you still buy without paying attention? I believe we have the power to change things starting from our behaviors. I think we can and we have to work together for a more sustainable and transparent food chain. The food we eat is not neutral. the choices we make are not neutral. So we have to work together because we owe it to our children and grandchildren. We have to leave them a planet where it is still pleasant to live. Thank you.